Today is November 26th, the year 2002.
Turkey Day coming up.
And here we are somewhere out in the Midwest, just backstage at the Dakota Bar and Grill. And who appeared over the horizon but Phil Woods. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Leigh. How nice to be ground zero for jazz in the Twin City area.
Well, for three, 4, 5, 6, 7 decades, here we are.
Here we are, still kicking.
Something that has been sticking in my mind is the Order of Arts and Letters that the French government awarded you. Mm-hmm. And I had missed that in reading about you. Tell me about that.
Well, that was Dizzy, Jackie McLean, Stan Getz, myself, Percy, Max, Percy Heath, Max Roach, in case people maybe not really sure what I'm talking about, but some of the pioneers of the jazz movement. We were all celebrating the music of Charlie Parker in Paris, and Jacques Lalangue was the Minister of Culture at that point, and he was a big jazz fan. So it was Jacques' idea, and Mitterrand was, and Danielle Mitterrand, the president's wife, is also a big jazz fan. So they thought it would behoove their love of jazz and for the honor of not only America but for France to give us. We were all awarded officier de Arts and Letters, and Dizzy was given the Chevalier, the knight, as the commandant de la cour, if you like. So that was kind of neat, and Mr. and Mrs. Mitterrand came. Well, Mrs. Mitterrand came backstage, and she was there at every performance. And we went to the what do you call it? The headquarters, the seat of government, or some fancy room or whatever. And the whole press, all the European press was there, and we were all given the kiss on the cheek and the medal, and it was quite a distinct honor,
Had you been through anything like this via the White House or otherwise?
Well, the closest I think I came to that was when I came back with Dizzy's band in '56. We played Mamie Eisenhower's birthday party somewhere in Washington, and then the Southern Senators didn't like the band because it was black and white. It was not quite as glorious. Some people always ask me, say, what's the difference between living in France and living in America? And this is going back a few years. But I say, well, in France, they want my autograph and they give me medals. In America, they want to look in the nether regions and see if I'm carrying any drugs. It's the lot of a jazz man is I think it's changed a little bit now. Now they're looking for terrorists, but I stray from the topic. The other honor that I received, so I must give my country due recognition, was I was awarded a doctorate from my local university, which is East Stroudsburg University, which houses the Al Cohen Memorial Library and the Al Cohen Collection, and jazz is a significant part of the Poconos in Pennsylvania. That's where I reside. David Liebman lives there, Herbie Green, Bob Duro, Bill Goodwin is in the area, Steve Gilmore, a lot of young musicians, Nelson Hill, Rick Chamberlain, Keith Jarrett lives across the river, and so jazz in the Poconos is alive and well, and the university saw fit to give me a doctorate for my contributions to the community in that sense. So yes, that about sums up the honors.
Well, certainly that's a wonderful match, the academics from France to Strasbourg, and the colony that you've developed in Pennsylvania, and the fact that you do residencies. I'd like to think along the lines of the difference between the street academy, the formal academy, and the life in the street academy being one thing, and the formal academy. And you've been through both, which should give you a PhD.
I've been through both because when I wanted to become a musician back in the 40s, I went to New York in 1947 to study with Tristano, and then in '48 I wanted to continue my musical studies, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But there was no jazz departments or no jazz schools in those days. There were a few minor small affairs, but nobody giving away diplomas or degrees and stuff. So I attended Juilliard for 4 years. And then I went on the road and did my graduate work. But when I went to Juilliard, I studied Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven all day long, and then at night I studied Bird and Diz, and it was the best of both worlds. The 40s in New York, where, as you know, you were there at the Palm Cafe, my friend. As you know, it was happening, man. Kerouac was in town, the Beat Generation was happening, the painters were painting. I saw Ussachevsky's first taped experiments with electronic music. I saw the rehearsals and performance of Stravinsky's The Rake's Progress. I attended all of the composer forums at Columbia. Charlie Parker was revolutionizing the world. Max Bodenheim, Ferlinghetti, of course, on the West Coast. Max Bodenheim in New York. The writers were happening. West Side Story, Leonard Bernstein. The activity was Tennessee Williams. Broadway, Agnes DeMille, Oklahoma. America was just, not only just jazz was burgeoning, but it was after the war years, and that's one thing about war, when it's all over, the creative spirit soars, and it was soaring at that period. And you bring up a very, very good point, that now you can go to almost any university in the States and you can major in John Coltrane. The problem being, when you graduate, you have to play top 40 at a Ramada Inn, for scale. This is, I'm not, anything that puts an instrument in a kid's hand is good, because he'd be less liable to buy a gun, and the jury is definitely back on the fact that any kid that learns music is going to be a better student, or a better professional. Whatever he decides to do for a living, he will be better at it if he's had music lessons. So it always infuriates me when the first thing they cut back in the school departments is the music program. The football program never gets cut back. I understand the reality of it, but it seems that the balance is way out of kilter there. They cut the arts. The arts they're not a luxury. They are an absolute integral part of our being, and we must do something to remedy that. So that's why I like to do, when I'm on the road, I do master classes and clinics, and I talk to young people. Because that's how I learned. I learned Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart, but I learned the essentials of bebop and jazz from Dizzy Gillespie's Patience, and the school was always open on the road. And from Charlie Barnett's band, and Charlie Parker gave me a piece of cherry pie and taught me about my instrument, and the sharing. There was no generational gap, because we had the big bands, you had the older seasoned musicians, and then the ranks were fleshed out with younger, more inexpensive players. But nevertheless, that was graduate work, and that we don't have quite so much. And so I feel it's my duty to give as much back as I can.
I'm talking with Phil Woods. It's the month of November, the 26th day, and here we are in the mid-continent, and we were talking about the stream of the formal academy versus the stream of the street academy. And among the street academy, there were names like Benny Carter, Charlie Parker, and Johnny Hodges. Would you just give a quick observation of those three? Let's start with Hodges.
Well, that was the first saxophone player I saw live. I had a very wise teacher by the name of Harvey LaRose, because I was not interested in playing the saxophone, but after a few weeks with Mr. LaRose, I just fell in love with the music. I was 13, 14 years old. And eventually I got to the point where he was giving me the four pop songs of the week were little folios you could buy for 25 cents, and they had piano accompaniment, and it was the standards of the day. And then, of course, I was Gershwin, Porter, Harold Arlen, you name it. And he also gave me, I remember one time, Mood to be Wooed, an obscure Duke Ellington piece. And the next week, Johnny Hodges, Duke Ellington's band, came to Springfield, Massachusetts. And of course, all us kids went to see the show. And Johnny Hodges had his feature, and he stepped down front, and he played Mood to be Wooed. You see, my teacher was very wise. He knew that Johnny was featuring that ballad that season. So I'd already worked out the piece with my teacher, who accompanied me at the piano and taught me the chords. And so when I saw Hodges, I said, oh my goodness. And I maybe back up a little bit, because just before that, one of the things that Mr. LaRose gave me was a book of transcribed Benny Carter solos. So the first jazz that I ever tried to play was reading Benny Carter solos with my teacher's accompaniment and guidance. And then I saw Johnny Hodges play the piece that I'd worked on. And then shortly thereafter, I heard the music of Charlie Parker, and everything just came into focus. I mean, then my course was clear from the alto triumvirate, as it were. When I heard Bird's music, I mean, I heard Mr. Carter, then the evolution to Hodges, and then the evolution to Parker. It just seemed so clear to me that, I mean, I was hooked, man. I had no choice.
When you think about Charlie Parker, it's very hard, I think, for a lot of us who have the impression of his health and addictions to think of him deeply immersed in Bartók, and you can name many of the modern players, composers, I mean.
Well, as I remember reading in Downbeat that Bird listened to Pierre Lunaire by Schoenberg, which is a very tough piece. It's an octet with soprano voice singing all major sevens and all that. Now, my family was quite prepared for the fact that I loved jazz. But when I went home when I went to the library and got Pierre Lunaire, I think they must have thought, well, the kid has really lost his marbles. Hee-haw, hee-haw, hee. I mean, it's really hard music, no words, just syllables growled and grunted. No, and Bird was very much into Bartók. I've heard that he wanted to study with Edgar Varese at the time. He wanted to take lessons and further his career. And also something overlooked by Charlie Parker was his kindness to young musicians. I mean, he didn't know me from a hole in the wall back in the late 40s, but we'd hang out in Charlie's Tavern, the Clearinghouse, which also no longer exists. And he would say, "Did you have lunch today?" I mean, there's Charlie Parker asking me if I'd eaten that day. I mean, he wasn't there to take my money or rip me. He was ready to buy me a sandwich. He always knew who the young alto players and young musicians were, not just alto players. I mean, one time, a little later before Bird died, I was working at a strip club playing Harlem Nocturne, and I had a saxophone. And I wasn't happy with the reed. I wasn't happy with the mouthpiece. I wasn't happy with the gooseneck. I wasn't happy with the saxophone, the body of the saxophone. I had to get new equipment because I don't sound good. And somebody says, "Hey, Charlie Parker's jamming across the street. The place called Arthur's Cafe, Sheridan Square." I ran across 7th Avenue on my break from playing Harlem Nocturne for the strippers. And there was Bird up on the bandstand with a drummer who was about 85 years old and had a drum set about as big as a pie plate. And on piano, about a 3-octave piano, I think was the drummer's father. He was a 95 or 105, I don't know. And a little teeny bandstand about as big as a card table. And Bird was playing on Larry Rivers, the famous painter who just passed, was playing on his baritone sax. And I could tell the Bird was having a little trouble with the horn. It wasn't in great shape. So I said, "Mr. Parker, perhaps you'd like to use my alto." He said, "Yeah, this baritone's kind of kicking my butt, son. That'd be nice." So I ran back across the street. I got my horn. I gave it to Bird. I'm as close to him as I am to you. And he played Long Ago and Far Away. And I'm listening. And it occurs to me that there's nothing wrong with my saxophone. The mouthpiece sounds just fine. The reed seems to be working. The gooseneck is doing fine. The body of the saxophone. And he said, "Now you play." Oh. When kids say that they're nervous in front of certain artists, I say, "You don't know what nervousness is until you're knee to knee with God." And he says, "Play," And after I played my feeble imitation of the master, he said, "Sounds real good, son." This time I levitated over 7th Avenue, and I played the bejesus out of Harlem Nocturne, and I gave up looking for the magic mouthpiece, the magic reed, the magic instrument, and I started to practice. Invaluable lessons.
And I suppose the strippers were dislocated.
They were just saying, "Whoa, you sound pretty good." Sound real good, Phil.
There's a name, I used to ride the Long Island to Murray Hill and beyond on the North Shore. And at a particular time, I was riding with Jasbo Collins and a staff announcer from Mutual. But sitting with us was Lenny Tristano. And of course, you came to New York and you began to study with Lenny.
Yes. A friend of mine, Hal Serra, who later became musical director for Julie London and did a lot of work on Broadway, orchestrating for a lot of shows as a ghostwriter. We used to come down from Springfield, Mass. to take lessons with Tristano. I was a little too young to absorb everything, but it was a good excuse to come to New York. I kind of got my feet wet coming to New York City. I remember one time Lenny said, tonight I'm playing at the Three Deuces and Charlie Parker's the other band. You guys want to come down and meet Bird? And we said, oh, yeah. So we, after the lesson, we went back to Manhattan, and then later that night you got in free, and for $1 you could get a Coca-Cola. We sat there for 6 hours for $1. The waiter kind of put us in the back near the drums. Not maybe the best seat, but nobody bugged us. It was a gentler time. And Lenny came over and got us, and we went, I wouldn't call it a backstage, but a little something, an alcove behind the stand, and Bird had a cherry pie. And he gave us all a slice of cherry pie. So, I shared a piece of cherry pie with Charlie Parker. I don't think too many guys can say that. I was very proud of that.
Well, certainly it was a welcome alternative to what might have been served. Phil Woods, I know, will be going on stand in just in a few minutes or so, but somehow or another, lurking in the background is the lively shadow of one Quincy Jones, a young man who had graduated from Lionel Hampton's band, one of the street academies, important, and indeed you wound up overseas with him, didn't you?
Well, Quincy put the band together for Dizzy Gillespie for a State Department tour in 1956. Quincy heard me on a Birdland All-Star tour that I did because I was working at Birdland. And yes, we remain very good friends to this day. I think I did all of his early New York recordings from This Is How I Feel About Jazz right up until he left to do The Pawnbroker. And we were also, I was also part of the European band that he took to Europe as part of a show called Free and Easy, which was a remake of Harold Arlen's St. Louis Woman. And Sammy Davis was supposed to join the show, but he was in a show called Mr. Wonderful, and that was held over, so he couldn't join our show. So our show kind of folded in Europe after about 3-4 months. But the band stayed together in Europe for another 7-8 months. But Quincy lost so much money on that tour. When he came back, he went to work for Mercury, and I think he said to himself, I'm never going to lose money again. I mean, he gave it his best shot. I mean, he's a dear, sweet friend, and very important to my life, because without Quincy, I probably wouldn't be here.
Well, here we are. It's the year 2002, and you've spoken very warmly of those post-war days. And then, as we moved on into the 50s, the lively scene of New York and the networking that I sensed you felt. Here it is, 2002, and there's that media center of the world, New York City, and for whatever else it stands for, the financial aspect. How do you see the business of the arts of jazz today?
Oh, I avoid New York City. It's just too tough. It's just too tough to see, I live in Pennsylvania, so for my wife Jill and I to go to New York, it's too darn expensive to get a hotel room. And there's too many musicians, so you can't get that. I mean, it's just, I've done all that, I mean, if it's a concert, I'd be glad to do it. But I'm not a big city guy. I never was. I get very uncomfortable. As far as the state of jazz is alive and well. I mean, the young players keep coming. We were graduating too many players. But God bless them. I mean, but they're playing for the door. There's no gigs. That's what I find most annoying. We're graduating like 3,000 tenor players a year. It's bad enough we're graduating 30,000 lawyers a minute. But lawyers always get a gig. Tenor players don't necessarily get a gig doing what they love. I mean, they end up teaching other guys how rough the business is, and you have this revolving door kind of policy where the only jazz going on is at the university level, and the instrument makers are making a good deal, and the teachers are getting paid, and the school is charging a fortune. It costs $37,000 to go to some of these universities for a year. I mean, that's a lot of money, man. I mean, mine only cost $1,500 in the 40s. I mean, I guess that was a lot considered back then. But the music's not going to go away. The international aspects of the music, we have to take it outside of New York. New York, the jazz clubs are kind of all foo-foo rooms. Mostly rich businessmen to bring their day. They're the ones that can afford it. It's not like me sitting there with $1 Coca-Cola soaking up the music. But there are other joints, as I say, where musicians are playing for the door, and you can go in and have a beer and still take part. So, I mean, I don't have my finger on the pulse like I used to. I try to be optimistic, but I also have kind of a wait-and-see attitude. I'm really interested in what's happening around the world, like the Brazilian stuff is happening, the new tango is happening, the new flamenco in Spain is happening. Some of the best jazz musicians are coming out of Italy, the Enrico Rava students. India has some great players. Japan is still a great marketplace. Without the international aspects of the music, I don't think I'd be making a living. I mean, I still spend quite a bit of time traveling to those environs. I'll be going to Frankfurt to work with a radio band. I'll be going to Japan where I'm working for Yamaha with a new, I'm the poster boy for their new saxophone, a new ALTO. It's coming out in 2003. So the state of jazz in the world, it's too many good men have died for this music. It's not going to go away. But I do think that it's having a difficult time, as are all of the arts in America at the present time. We're all having a difficult time dealing with the war and the terrorism and all that. And I think it's affecting business. When it affects business, it affects entertainment. And that's what jazz is. It's an art form that walks that precarious line between being an art form and being entertainment.
Phil Woods, thank you very much for taking time. November 26th, year 2002, and we're just backstage, Midwest, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and the Dakota Bar and Grill.
I enjoyed chatting with you, and I want to take this opportunity to wish your listeners, I don't know when you're going to air it, but happy holidays, whatever the holiday may be. But you have a good Thanksgiving and a good Christmas, old friend, and a Happy New Year.
Thank you very much.